This episode of Around the Layout is brought to you by Highball Graphics. For over 25 years, Highball Graphics has been providing high-quality decals for railroads in New England, Canada, and beyond. With over 2,000 sets in scales N through G, Highball Graphics has you and your project covered. Highball Graphics specializes in custom decal orders, serving freelance railroads worldwide. Check out their easy-to-use website at highballgraphics.com or email them at info@highballgraphics.com. Discover prototypical track and turnouts with the Roadmaster series from Oak Hill Model Railroad Track Supply. Proudly made in the United States, Oak Hill's handcrafted turnouts provide unparalleled detail and accuracy, giving your layout museum-quality track work at an affordable price. Whether fully built or in easy-to-assemble kit form, Roadmaster provides all the details of real track. Looking for a custom piece of track work? Oak Hill can help with custom turnouts, diamonds, crossings, and more. Check out all of their offerings on their website, ohrtracksupply.com.
ATLP Rewind.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Around the Layout, where model railroaders come to tell their story. My name is Ray Arnott. So glad you could join us. Joining me again on Around the Layout, coming to us from Sebastian, Florida, Don Irace. Don, welcome back.
Hey, Ray. Thanks for having me back.
It's good to see you again. We just saw you a couple weeks ago. We got to do the Ops to You Drop out in Syracuse. What a great time.
Yeah, it's always been a good time. It's my favorite part of the year going there.
Yeah, that's a really great event. Bill Brown is the man in charge. Not only does he have a fantastic layout, but he does a great job organizing that event.
Yeah, I think I've operated on all them layouts at least probably 3-4 times already. But they're all fun. So every year we just pick 3 new ones, cycle through the whole thing, but it's fun. It's a good time.
Yeah, you've been going a long time. I meant to ask them how long they've been doing it, but it's been quite a few years, obviously.
Yeah, I think I only missed last year. I missed because my wife's mother was having problems and I couldn't get out of here to go. So that was the only year I missed. I went from when it started and then here, I don't even remember how many years it was, but all I know I've gone every year except for last year.
Yeah, and somehow we ended up on all the layouts, the same layouts, cool. And we all so the 4 of us. It was Mark Herrick, yourself, Joe Mame, and I, and we started off at Dave Martini's. That's his CSX layout, and had a good time there. It was a good crew and good ops there. And then we headed over to Bill Brown's for dinner and then ran his layout. And that was certainly a treat. And then closed out the day at Drew James and his Canada Pacific and Canada Spokane and Pacific, CSP. There we go. So yeah, great. Hard to remember the name, but definitely won't forget the operations on it. Fantastic layouts. And we had a really great time.
It seems like we end up at Bill's like every other year because between the standard gauge and his narrow gauge, we every year we just swap from one to the other. But all layouts are good. They all run great. We have fun on all of them. Great bunch of guys up there. Anytime there's ever a convention in New York and Rochester, all up there, it's always a good time up there. So they lost a few good ones though. A few like Mike Shanahan's, and they lost who else? Jim Height. They lost him.
Right.
2 more fantastic layouts to operate on, but those guys were good. Mike Shanahan was a hell of a modeler. Sorry, they were going to be missing them guys. That's for sure.
Yeah, but I mean, even with that, and it's certainly sad to see those go away, it's still amazing. I think they had like 40 guys on the list that participated in it. So really well done. And, we certainly are appreciative of everybody who opens up their layout and invites us to participate because it's a lot of work. I mean, to be able to host that many operating sessions, you're a guy that knows well. I was just re-listening to the first time you were on the show and talking about how often you operated your first layout in Scituate, and boy, oh boy, I just, I get tired just thinking about maintaining that much railroad. And these guys are doing it all in one weekend. It's a lot of work.
It's a lot of work. My layout in Rhode Island was a big layout to keep 15 operators happy every week. We didn't start off like that. Like I said on the first podcast, it just started for me and my father. with a small little one-level railroad, and then the thing just kept growing and growing, and more people. It's all my wife's fault anyway. She has too many customers. Her husband's a model railroaders. They all just kept coming over. And I'm like, to my father, I said, we got to do something else here. We're going to have to make this thing bigger. So we're going up over the top. Over the top, and some of it's on the bottom. So, but we did, and we did it for a long time. I mean, we had probably, by the time from the beginning to when I actually closed it up and moved, well over 750 op sessions. That was just the op sessions with the regular group. That wasn't counting the conventions and the tours and all that other stuff that went with it. It was
Yeah.
but it was fun. I enjoyed it. I kind of miss it. I do miss that big layout. I'm not gonna lie, I do miss it. So I do miss the guys, and it was just fun having that many guys operating on a layout. So.
Yeah, well, which is going to lead into our conversation here in a bit about operations. I brought you back because, one of the things I know you absolutely love about it is the ability to operate a layout. And, you obviously did that with your first layout. You're doing it with your second layout. And, and then, of course, the ability to go around to other layouts. And you've also helped quite a few people along the way build operations into a layout, whether existing or in their plans. So, really looking forward to talking about that. And then at the end of the show, we'll talk about some plans that we have to talk about operations on a more regular basis. But before we get there, why don't you get me up to speed on the Situate. Get us up to speed on the Sebastian layout, the one in your shed there, and what you've been up to since the last time we talked. Because I think you encapsulate that saying that a layout may never be completely done. You're still doing some tweaks down there.
Oh yeah, I mean it's never finished. I mean, as soon as you think you're getting close, the list just grows. So my list never really gets shorter than a half a page because I do one thing and I write down two things. So the last time we were on, I think I was just starting to get a crew together and start doing operating. It wasn't really an every week thing. Till my problem is that the summertime is very slow because most of my crew are guys are snowbirds. Basically, they go back up north for the winter and our summer, and and then they come back. So they come back in October and they leave right about now. Right around in May. So I've already lost two guys down here this year. It's once we got going, they're here. Then it's an every Wednesday night operating session until I can get others like John Farrington's layout. We operated there last night. Once we can get on with John on a more regular basis, then we'll bounce back and forth between the two of us. There's Jeff Hankey, he's coming down, and he moved his layout here, so he'll be another one. So little by little, our operations is going to grow to a more round robin group. So because I really want to get off. As much as I enjoy operations, my problem is I'm still trying to get the railroad up and running. And I mean, up and running, I'm trying to get other things done and things I want to do. And it's hard because I only have a few days. We operate on Wednesday. So by Tuesday, I'm cleaning up.
Yeah.
Wednesday, we operate. And then Thursday, the tables come back out. All the stuff comes back out again. And then I'm not out here every day because, of course, I got to go do things with my wife and yard work and whatever, all that stuff to do. And by the time here comes Tuesday again. I got to put everything away. I'm like, what did I get done? Well, anyway, but I do get some stuff done. Since the last time, and this stuff is pretty recent, people follow me on Facebook and on YouTube. I put in, I started doing I had MOW equipment. I had a Sperry rail card. I had that little Bachman truck that I put sound in that I had in the box because I just couldn't get it anywhere. And I feel as though that stuff is important to model railroad operations because even you just don't run trains. You got to have track equipment inspections. It's all a part of the operating experience for me. And I have all this equipment, and I've painstakingly put sound decoders in and capacitors in and all this stuff in to make the stuff run good so we can actually use it during operation sessions. But the trouble is, it's either stuck in Worcester Yard and taking up space that I don't have, or it's in the box. So I said, I started looking around, and I found a spot up in Cumberland, I call it up there, and it was a nice spot over there. So something, I think I'll just cut a switch in that main line and put a nice like maybe a 1.5 foot long siding in there, and I could put my Sperry rail car and my truck in there. This way here, when we want to use them, we just roll them right out, no problem.
Right.
Plus they're out, and I know they're out, and I like when they're out, and I can see them. So I did all that, and I never used it. I said, well, you know something? There's an industry that's like in Woonsocket that that takes hopper cars, and
Yeah.
I'm like, see, that's here we go. I said, so I'm thinking maybe I want to put that over there instead.
Yep.
So I started looking around other places for MOW tracks, and I'm nosing around in Valley Falls, and behind the engine house is like a big long piece of property there with nothing on it but grass. I said, you know something? If I just mow all that grass up, and
Yep.
I laid 2 MOW tracks in there. So basically, I got more than enough. It's like a rip track in there and everything now.
Yeah.
So the MOW got moved over to behind the Valley Falls engine house, and Ralco Industries was born.
Yep.
And while it's in Cumberland, it's actually in Woonsocket, but not
Yeah.
this layout is in Cumberland.
Yeah.
And people again follow me on Facebook and on YouTube, seeing the process of that whole thing taking effect and everything. So basically, what I started off with just an MOW base ended up with a whole nother industry on the railroad. So along with that came fitting it into the ops scenario. What train was going to switch that, but we'll get into that later. So then the other thing I was doing, last summer I went on a massive car weathering deal. I bought a spray booth, I bought a new airbrush, I bought a compressor, I bought all the paint, and I just went to town all
Yep.
summer long weathering. I got 150 cars, and I got them all weathered except for like maybe 25 tank cars I got left to do. Well, 25. I just bought 3 more, so now I got 28 tank cars to do. But so I did a lot of that. That took time, but it was worth it. And I didn't operate last year hardly at all in the summer. Nobody was around. So I just kind of took the summer off. The other thing I did is my locomotives. I mean, people that know me, my locomotives are my thing. There's nothing better for model railroad operations than locomotives that run.
Yes.
You don't
Yes.
push them, you don't pull them, you don't touch them. They just don't, and none of that stuff. I've always had capacitors. I totally believe in capacitors in every locomotive. Even though the locomotives run good, the capacitors make them run better. And the other thing I had to do is I had to put reed switches in, because with capacitors on the ESU decoders, if you don't open up the circuit, you can't program them. It just goes to heck, and you can't do nothing with it. So I put reed switches in and little magnets and all that stuff. And then ESU came out with the new Atlas style board with the 6 capacitors on it. Go figure. So I'm like, okay, well, and plus I only had select decoders anyway, and I wanted to get into the V5s. So I went around and I started changing all the decoders again. These engines I have on here, most of them are excess of probably 18 to 20 years old, and they've had at least 4 different variations of sound decoders in their life. So my whole layout and all my engines are all up to snuff. Everything's got from version 5 decoders and the new capacitor boards. And it's nice because I don't need the magnets and the reed switches anymore, because it's a power pack that the decoder self disconnects when it's programming. So I did that. And because the guys, when they come over here, like, how do you get these locomotives run so smooth? And I'm like, well, it's a lot of effort, and I do it because I want to do it, because I use a proto throttle, and John Farrington has a proto throttle. So all my locomotives are set up to operate off a proto throttle. And everybody says, well, how about the cabs? Well, as long as they're set up right with the proto throttle, cabs work. They work fine. There's no problem with the cabs. My biggest complaint is the momentum. Some guys just don't like locomotives with a lot of momentum, and I like a lot of momentum, and they're my locomotives, so they're going to get it. So it was funny because I was at John's last night. He's got more momentum in his than I got in mine. But,
you throttle down and it runs from his house to your house about.
You got to make sure you know where the brake is. Put it that way. So the other thing I've done, I'm just going down the list quick of what I've been doing to get caught up. We always had the remote dispatching. We had signals. We had detection. What I did have is I had double-headed signals because the trains heading into a diverging route had two Type A signal heads. Obviously, the one on the bottom tells them what the route is, and the top one gives them the train movement. What I had done in my haste is I ended up wiring the bottom signals to the turnouts. I cheated. So when you threw the turnout, the signal dropped. The only thing bad about that is when the train went through the signal, it stayed the same color until he cleared the switch, and then we throw the switch back. And I'm like, I put up with that for about 2 months, and I'm like, I can't do this no more. I did all this work. I can't have this. So I went out and bought more decoders and more wire, and I posted pictures again on my Facebook page and on my YouTube page of the whole process. And we took those bottom signals off and we put them on CATs. So now the CAT system controls the signals as the dispatcher sets them, and they work. It works fantastic. Mark Herrick, he takes care of all my basic. Well, he took care of all the panel. He built it and everything, and he's been maintaining it. And I finally started playing with it because he was busy doing other stuff. So I kind of got into it, and I think I kind of figured it out myself now, which is good because I need to know this stuff. You know what I mean? I just can't depend on one person to to take care of something that's not working right. So I decided to dive into it and figure it out. The other big thing that we didn't have was turnout feedback. That is important because when you have a dispatcher and you have yards with macro settings, I don't know I'm sure most people know what a macro is. So basically a macro is if you're in a yard and you've got multiple tracks, when you got one track feeding in from each end, macros help to create a route by the push of a button that will line up all your switches for that one route, whatever track you want to come in on both ends of the yard. That presents a problem when you have a dispatcher on. If there's no dispatcher, then it's not a problem. If there's a dispatcher, it's a problem because if somebody sets a macro in a yard, it's going to change, but the turnouts on the panel don't indicate what position the switches are in, so you don't know if they're open or closed. So after a few times of that happening, when we had a dispatcher, I stopped the guys from doing macros. I said, you can't do macros because it's messing up the dispatcher, and he doesn't see what's going on anymore. What he thinks is one thing is totally another thing. So obviously trains are going on the ground and all this crap.
Yep.
And I don't care for that. So I ventured into this this turnout feedback. Basically, you have your I use NCE, so NCE AIU mounted on the wall. I had to buy a couple of more, and it has 14 points on it. And you just run 2 wires from the turnout to the AIU, and basically, as the turnout contacts open and close, it sends a signal to the computer to the panel that shows the position where that turnout's open or closed.
Oh.
So that all worked out good, but the biggest problem I had with that is the contacts on the toilet switch machines. In my opinion, they're not. I don't know if any of the new ones are better, but I've never had really good luck with them.
Yeah,
And
they're almost like I don't even know how to describe it. It's like almost like paper kind of thing to peel right off of them, right?
Yep, yeah. They're all computer stuff in there anyway, so it's not really much. So I'm like, so I hooked a few up one day and I got them working. And I come out here the next day, hooked a few more up, and went back to test them. And the ones I did the day before weren't working anymore. I'm like, hey. So I'm like, I got to do something else. So off to Amazon I go. Again, Facebook, my YouTube explains everything I did. Looking for these small little micro switches that I could just solder those 2 wires on and put them underneath the tortoise machine and just let the roller ride up on the pivot. As the pivot comes around, it opens the switches or it closes the switches.
Oh, no kidding.
It works perfect. So I mean, I fixed the ones I had to fix, and then I said, I think I'm just going to do them all because it's just going to happen, and then it's going to happen during an op session. So I said, I just kept on going, and I put those micro switches on every tortoise machine I had. It's easy. I mean, just put the wires on. You put the switch in the position you want it in. You put the thing up there so the barrel pushes the switch closed, and then you just hot glue the thing right to the side of the turnout, and voila, it's all done. Usually the same rule applies if I have a dispatcher on duty. No macros can be made. There's not a lot. I mean, the dispatch can be busy. We didn't think he was going to be as busy, but we found out that in the beginning of the session, like maybe for the first hour, maybe for the first 3/4 of 1 hour, things are pretty quiet on the dispatcher side. But once that hour's over, forget it.
Mm.
Everything, the whole hell breaks loose, and then he's like, he's like all over the place, and there's things going on everywhere, and it's
Yeah.
hard to keep up with it. So, even if they did do the macros, at least he would see that what position, and everything was true to him, so he knew exactly what was going on, which is important. And the most important thing I did since then is a new floor in my room,
Yes. Very
because
important.
oh
Yep.
my god, that's like the biggest thing I've done. And my operators think that's the greatest thing since sliced bread in here, because you think walking on concrete's bad, wood is just as bad.
Yeah.
And when when you start getting older and you're walking on, wood and concrete all the time, and you're on it for 2 or 3 hours, even me, by the time I get in the house, my feet are just toast. My legs are killing me. So my wife was going on. She knew I wanted to put a floor down, so she went on Temu, and she found these good deal on all these little squares. And she said, "How many do you think you need?" I said, "A lot." I said, "That's like 450 square feet." I says, "We're gonna need a lot."
Yeah.
So she said, "Well," she says, "I'll order a whole." She ordered like 30 packages of them,
Yep.
And she says, "Put them all down. If you need more, we'll order more." So they all came in, and I come out here, and I was just gonna do where we walk,
Yeah.
So just do where we walk. We don't need to do the whole floor. So I just did where we walked and everything. And she come out, and she goes, "What are you doing?" I says, "I'm almost done." I said, "I'm not going to need any more." I said, "Well, I think I made it." She says, "Well, what about the rest of the floor?" I'm like, "Who cares about the rest of the floor?" She goes, "It looks like crap," she says. She says, "It doesn't look finished." She said, "It looks terrible." So I'm
Uh,
put them all down. She said, "I'm going to go order more. We'll finish the whole floor."
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I
You don't
said,
say no. You just, yeah,
"No,
you nod your
yeah,
head
no,
and
no,
say,
no.
yep, yep,
Yeah."
I agree. Yep.
So I did that. So the whole floor's done, and she was right.
Yeah.
It does look a lot better. But when the guys came in here the first time to operate, and they walked in, I go, "Wow, this is nice," he said. They were
Yeah.
all happy after 3 hours. They could still feel their feet. Nobody was complaining. So my father will be back down for the winter, so he's going to appreciate this floor too.
Oh, I'm
So
sure everybody's going to appreciate that. And yeah, we've been at layouts where it's concrete floors, and even mine, I had to put some anti-fatigue mats down, because once you're on that concrete and any bit of time, yeah, it's just a killer on the feet. And, it definitely ruins a good time for sure when you're sore, and, so that's awesome. Yeah. Some
yeah,
great updates from you. And
yep.
well, you've hinted at a few things I definitely want to talk about, and certainly want to hit them before I forget about them. One thing that we hinted at during the first show that we really didn't dive into a whole lot, but I think it's a really unbelievable concept that, I've even participated in. And I know when we talk to other people about it, they're fascinated. So I want to talk a little bit about remote dispatching,
Okay.
because to me, it's such a cool idea to, one, incorporate somebody that's far away. Like you've been able to stay in touch with us and still continue to participate by doing remote dispatching. And it's something that you kind of came up with with your first layout, and it's gone to multiple others, including layouts unfortunately we don't have anymore. But why don't you tell us a little bit about how this remote dispatching works, and how it kind of developed?
All right. So which this layout, or well, we'll just start with the other layout because that's where it all was born there.
Yeah.
So on the old layout, I don't know if you ever meet Ed Jaware?
I never met him, but yeah,
No.
you've mentioned him several
Right.
times. I knew
Okay.
he was your guy.
Right. So Ed Jaware was another one of my wife's customers' husbands that was into trains, and he lived the next town over. So he started coming to the layout, and he was running and everything. And we had dispatching. We had a regular 3-phase dispatch panel, and we had all toggle switches and all that stuff. There was no computer. There was none of that stuff. We had the 2-way radios, but everything was in-house local. So we did that until Ed decided to move. So Ed said, "Well, I'm moving to Georgia." I'm like, "Well, that's terrible." I says, "Why are you moving?" He said, "I'm going to retire, get out of here." He didn't like Rhode Island anymore. He wanted to leave. He says, "Well," so he goes, "You know something, I think we can set this all up," he said, so I can actually run the layout from my new house in Georgia." I'm like, "All right, well, I don't know where to begin with that." I said, "So feel free to enlighten me." So first off, we did is we moved everything onto the computer. Built the JMRI panels. When we got everything working. This was way before we left. We started doing this well in advance. He said, let's get this thing all on computers, so everything's already there and ready. So we did that. We got the radio hooked into the computers. We got all that stuff done. It took a while to build the panels and all that stuff for that. Then we tested it, and it was working good. No problem. We never used the toggle switches again on that board. They were there just for looks, like, but they never touched them. Not unless something happened to the computer crash, we fell back to the toggle switches, but that hardly ever happened. So we had two computers. One computer was strictly for the dispatcher and the control of the train movement and the signals, and the other computer had the two-way radios and everything tied into it. So there was never, we didn't have to deal with one computer. We just used two. So then a day came. So Ed, he did that at his house in Gloucester. So we did all the testing from his house. So
right.
So I don't know if people remember Yahoo Messenger.
Mm-hmm.
That's a long time ago.
A long time ago, yeah.
That was what we started using. So we had two-way radios. We used Yahoo Messenger, and that's how we communicated. And on my layout, because there was so many guys in two levels, we were using one channel, and I'm like, I said, this is not weird. It's too much radio chat, and nobody can get it's like 15 guys. You can't get a word in edgewise with a dispatcher. So I said, well, maybe we'll have two dispatchers. I said, we'll have a remote dispatcher, which will be you, and then we'll have a dispatcher sitting here. So one guy could take the upper level, one guy could take the lower level. We'll use the small helix out in the other room as the dividing point between the two divisions. And the dispatcher here will have his own frequency to talk to the crew on his layout, on his area, territory, and then that you will have another channel to talk to your territory, and then the dispatcher here will have a radio that can talk to you direct.
Yeah.
So everybody can talk to everybody.
Let's talk about, before we go any further, we talked about the software they're using, but talk about the magic that happens between going from Yahoo Messenger to being able to actually have it broadcast on the two-way radios. Because I think that's kind of a fascinating thing. It's like, holy mackerel, I'm using a two-way radio to talk to somebody 1,000 miles away. How did that connect?
All right, so we're using the 20-channel FRS radios, the little family frequency radios, and basically what we did is we bought cables and plugged into the radio, and then from there, because the new radios have the mic and the speaker in the same jack, we had to buy that jack, and then we had to split that. And they make all these cables to do that. Don't ask me what the numbers are. I couldn't tell you right now. But back then we had the RCA connectors too. That's not even the new stuff now. But I still have the RCA connectors here because it's all the same stuff. So we used that cable. We split it to two individual cables, and then back then we had the sound. Well, you probably still do on a desktop. You got a sound card in your computer, so you would plug the microphone in the microphone jack. I think that was the pink one, and then you would plug the speaker one into the green one, so you separated everything. And we took the radio, so the remote radio was put on 10, privacy channel 10, so we didn't have any interruptions from the outside world. And that radio was put on Vox 1, and the volume was set at around probably 3. Then Ed could adjust the volume on the computer to match what we was hearing in his ears, because sometimes we get distorted if the volumes were too high. So basically, there was no buttons for Ed to push. You just start talking, and then the Vox would open up on the radio, and it would broadcast into everybody's ears, And then when you want to talk to the dispatcher, you had to key your mic for a couple of seconds to start talking, because it took that long for the squelch to break so the dispatcher could hear you talking. Because if you just started pushing and talking, he would cut the first two words off that you said. So and that still stands true today.
Yeah,
so
that happens from time to time, right?
Yeah. Well, I still have to remind my guys to make sure because we haven't down here. These guys are not used to the radio thing. So now this is all new to them. Now they've never been to this level of running a railroad. When we tried to use the iPhones with the what's the hell that app, that two-way radio app they got on the iPhones.
Yeah, it was like a modern day Nextel kind of thing, but it was an app that
Zello,
that allowed
Zello,
that.
it was Zello app. So we tried to use that, but I only had wireless Wi-Fi in the shed then, and my cell signal here for AT&T, most everything's with the metal roofs and the metal buildings, it knocks it out. So we were having a lot of trouble with the cell phone stuff, and I'm like, I says I gotta try to get I gotta get the radios back again. So I finally figured I tried to do everything with these laptops to make that work, and I couldn't get it to work. And then Mark found an adapter on Amazon. It's a USB adapter. The cable's plugged right into it. And you plug it in your computer, and the computer just configures the whole thing. Because plugging the wires into the jacks on the side, the computer wouldn't configure it. You know what I mean? And we did it. We could either hear me, it couldn't talk to me, or vice versa. I couldn't win, and we did that for months before we finally. I said, "Let me go out and buy this jack." I bought that jack, plugged in, thing worked like We the People, right? So that's what we use now. But yeah, so you basically got an FRS radio, you got the cables, and you got a desktop with a sound card, or you got a laptop, and you just plug this little Amazon device in there, and that's where the magic comes from. But now we're using Skype. We don't use, because Yahoo Message is gone. That was gone before I even moved. We moved to Skype. Skype was the second thing we used, and we've been using it ever since. As far as the remote stuff, we were using VNC. If people don't know what that is, I think it's Virtual Network Systems or something like that, whatever it is.
Yeah.
So basically, you have a host computer, and then the remote computer will log into the host computer and take access to the host computer, and all the screens show up down in Ringgold, Georgia, just like magic. So we used Skype. We used that for VNC for a long time, and then the last year and a half or so, VNC they started not supporting the free pod anymore, and they took a lot of stuff away, and we were having nothing but trouble with it. So we moved over to TeamViewer.
Right.
TeamViewer is awesome. It's still free. You can use it. You get a subscription for your personal use, and it's the same thing. The only thing is that has access to voice, so we could try to get rid of Skype and just use this one thing, but we have not been able to get the audio part to work at all. So we just kind of forgot about it and went to because the trouble is when you start TeamViewer, it was capturing the audio for both. So Skype was grabbing it, TeamViewer was grabbing it, and when you start talking, you're hearing yourself in the radio. You know what I mean?
Right.
I'm like, hey. So now we had to go through there, figure that out. So we figured out that we can shut off the audio in TeamViewer, and then that all went away.
Right.
So basically, we just moved that situation to this layout. It's the same thing, only this, and it just works the same way. It's really nothing different about. The only thing about this layout different from our Rhode Island layout is that we were using JMRI on that for the panel, and down here we changed it over to CATS. I said, I like CATS a lot better because you can do a lot more with CATS than you can with JMRI. So as far as the remote stuff, it's not hard. It's all free. It's just a matter of setting it all up, getting all the equipment you need, and setting it all up. And it's really, and I got people that, well, you think I'll be able to I want to dispatch a layout some night, and I'm like, well, yeah, it's always possible. And Mark has the same thing. He's got guys that want to dispatch his layout too, but that's my job. You know what I mean? and on this one, it's his job. If I have a night that he can't make it and somebody else wants to do it, then that's fine. I mean, I've had guys call up, say, do you have any kind of formal training to dispatch? I'm like, well, it's not really formal training, but what I would do with you is I would get you on like, maybe a week before and have you run some trains around and you try to learn. It's not a big railroad. It's not really hard. It's single line track, no passing sign. Well, there's a couple of passing signs, but nothing to speak of. Basically, they're just runarounds for the local jobs. And you just got to kind of use your head when you're bringing trains up and down. It can be done. We've run multiple trains up and down. To to keep everything moving and fluid. So we don't have to say, well, you can't come down until the other guy comes up and blah blah. No, we can run a train up and then run another train up behind him, and we can move them around, and it works out good. So, but yeah, I mean, I would, definitely, if anybody wanted to try it, and Mark was available. Mark's got first stabs at dispatch, and that's all there is to it. That's all I can tell anybody. I'm not gonna lie. He does it. He does it for me on his BNSF, and I do it for him down here. So that's just the way it is.
Yeah, and one thing that's really neat about the remote dispatching is it keeps you honest when it comes to the realisticness of a dispatcher not being on the railroad. Where if the person's in the room, the temptation to get up and go look and try to figure it out.
Yeah.
Well, when you're in Florida and the layout's in Wyndham or vice versa, there's just no getting up to go see it. I mean, unless you can sneak a FaceTime video in and see what's going on. So it makes the operator really have to communicate out well to the dispatcher, and it just adds a whole bunch of realism.
Yeah, that's where text messaging comes into play there. Because there was a problem. I get a text message from him, he'll get a tickle. What's going on over there? Right? Because I can't see it. Because some guys are trying to. The other thing is, operators get so into what they're doing and so into their work, which I like because I want them to get into what they're doing because they do a better job. That they go deaf.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? They just go deaf, and you got to, you call the guy 3 times. It's like you don't even answer. You're totally oblivious. That's why we use headsets, because some guys had the radios, and with all the radios hanging off people's shirts, you're hearing the whole conversation with everybody, and I don't like that. I want you to hear the conversation in your ear, and that's it. So that's when you make a text message. Can you go over and tell what's his face to answer his radio so we can get him moving or whatnot? But other than that, that's really it works out pretty well. And like I said, if anybody, the trick to dispatching is to know the layout. So I will say that Mark's layout is way more complicated than mine is.
Yeah.
I mean, he's got a lot more railroad than I have. He's got big size, big trains, a lot of switching jobs. I used to have all that, but now I don't have any of that anymore. But mine will keep. You can ask him. Mine will keep him busy after an hour. After the first hour, forget it. It doesn't stop. Because everybody's coming back, and then guys are jumping on new jobs and going out, and there's stuff going on in between that, and it stays busy. So we run. We're good for like 3.5 hours, but it's fun.
Yeah, what was fun for me, I mean, you were even dispatching my layout and doing, paper warrants, and it was fun because you had dispatched my layout before you even saw my layout. Yeah. So it was funny when you came over and you're like, now I kind of get what you were getting at. Like you had a lot better idea. It's funny seeing it, but yeah, you were still able to off of a sketch of the layout, you were able to figure it out and dispatch it and understand, most of it. But it is neat to be able to see it and understand and know the layout. And I'm sure trying to dispatch marks without even seeing it would be quite the task.
And it'd be a task, that's for sure. Yeah. But once you put that iPad up on there so I can see what was going on over there. Yeah. And the other thing is your layout, because I'm talking to people, because basically we're using the same system to talk back and forth. We all use the same exact Skype, radios, that whole thing. Right. That doesn't change. But when you're writing out track warrants and stuff, basically the dispatch, the P&W dispatcher up in St. Albans doesn't see what's going on in Worcester. So, but I liked it because I felt like I was part of the group in there. Yeah. You know what I mean? Because with your layout, it's a little busy in the beginning, and then it kind of fades away for like an hour and 3/4.
Yeah.
You're sitting there going like this. So basically I just get up and go do something until somebody calls me, and and then I come back, and then, because your sessions, it's busy in the front, and then it's busy right at the end. But the trouble is, it takes all this time to get to the end, Yes. But it's just a part of what the layout is. I mean, it is what it is. I have fun. It doesn't matter to me. My biggest thing is I'm still a part of the Tri-State Railroaders group when I'm doing that. And, that was the only way for me to hang on. You know what I mean? So I enjoy doing it.
Yeah. And then the advantage for us, not only keeping you involved, but it's it just gives that it's one less person you have to fit in a room if you have a smaller layout.
Yep.
So now you're not worried about the dispatcher. Like, where do I create this area? As long as you have an area where you can set up a laptop and and set the radio up and plug the wires in,
Right.
you really eliminate that person out of the room. And so there's a lot of advantages to it. It's a really cool concept, and something that we developed. And unfortunately we've lost Tony Donatelli in the time that you and I have talked. But he was another one you were able to remote dispatch, and you've done it to pretty much all of them. And I'm sure there'll be more coming online, hopefully soon, that you'll have the opportunity to participate in up here too.
I hope so. I mean, the biggest thing with the difference between the computer and the paper is that on the computer, you can see what's going on the layout. You can see detection. You can see where trains are. You can see trains moving around. You see activity. When you're doing pencil and paper, that it takes all that away. So you're even more alone in your space. You know what I
Right.
mean? But
Right.
that's just the concept. A lot of people do train order stuff and paper and pencil operations, and it's just a part of it.
Yeah.
So someday maybe you'll do that too. You'll have remote dispatching on your layout.
Someday maybe, yeah. But until then, at least I can entertain you with a virtual Railfan cam that I put up with the iPad, and at least
absolutely.
you can watch us, and we can all look and stare at you and stuff in the screen, and
it made
versa.
it made it a lot better when you did that. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah, that was a lot of fun. So eventually, I got to get back to operating that thing.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. I keep telling people, if you ever want to not finish a layout, start a podcast. It'll definitely help you keep that. But no, nonetheless, the other thing I wanted to, hit on, because you had mentioned it, and it's really one of the thoughts that we talk about operations, and, we experience it, and, seeing other layouts, is what makes good operations. And you hit one of the things that it drove right home to me. And I think it's like, if not the top of the list, it's got to be very close. And it is locomotives, and being able to rely on your power to be able to be where you keep your hands off of it and not have to mess around with it, makes for a spectacular operating session.
Yeah, it does. I mean, I'm really real fussy with my locomotives. I clean my locomotive wheels and my track before every session every week. I don't take a chance. I know I'm saying, oh, you got capacitors in there, you don't have to worry about it. But you can get lazy like that, and eventually that black gook that loads up on the rail from the DCC arcing is gonna even catch up with a capacitor. Capacitors are not they're not a power pack and a generator that just keeps generating power. The only way a capacitor works is that it needs to have power to keep itself charged to discharge. You just, if there's no power coming through the rail, the capacitor is going to last how big
Seconds.
the capacitor is, 6 seconds, and then it's lights out. You know what I mean?
Right.
Then you get your finger and you're pushing and you're pushing and you're pushing. And to me, I just shut the lights off and go back in the house when that happens. I've operated on some layouts that could have used a bank of capacitors in some locomotives. But to me, locomotives are my priority. They're smooth running, they're slow running. My locomotives are going to crawl when they first start up. They're limited in speed to about 15 to 18 miles an hour. You can ramp the throttle up to the cows come home, and it ain't going to go any faster than that. Whatever locomotives are consist together are completely speed matched. They stay together. I don't break them up. Once they're matched up to stay. I have like probably 3 sets that are matched up. Well, on the PNW side, on the PNW side, there's 4 sets, and the Jeep 38s all stay up in Valley Falls, because in the real and prototypically, Valley Falls always ran the Jeeps. Those guys up there. They didn't want nothing else up there but Jeeps. I rode with them when they had a U-23B or a B-23-7 locked onto a GP-38, and when they give the GE the gun, the EMD slams right into the back of it, because they load up so different that they said they just keep them the same. So they either got the GEs together or they got the EMDs. But in my time frame and era, and I try to follow the prototype as close as I can, I have just EMDs in the bond. There's 3 up there. The Dash 8s are all road locomotives. They move all the interchange trains around. and there's 3 sets. So every time another train goes out, we change sets. We don't use the same set. Every train gets a different set, and we just cycle through all the sets.
Yeah.
But as far as the locomotives goes, capacitors are the utmost. People would argue with me about that. Is if your track is clean and it's wired right, you don't need them. Well, that's not necessarily true with DCC, because once you start forming that black crud on the rail and on the wheels, and it only takes one op session for that to start happening, you can get to the end of your session and you can start having skipping, and the capacitor's not keeping up with it anymore, and it just happens, especially your road crossings. My biggest problem is at the road crossings, because they're level crossings. The rail just sticks up, even
Mm-hmm.
with the pavement. It's very hard to clean those portions of rails across the road, because as you're cleaning the rail, you're taking the paint and all the
Mm-hmm.
weathering off the road too. So
Right.
I tend very rarely do I ever clean them. I have a thing all made up really, really thin. It's only about the width of the rail, and I just rub back and forth. And I still whip some of the paint off, and I have to
Yeah.
touch it up every now and then. But other than that, my guys, they really they have a good time with the locomotives. They don't have any problems with stuff stopping. And if it does stop, I had one night that kept cutting out, and I didn't know why. I just took it off the layout, threw it on the desk, gave him another locomotive. I took it apart, and one of the wires broke off the side frame,
Right.
which
Yeah.
happens. I mean, the things are moving. But they've been moving back and forth for 25 years. They're going to break off eventually. You know what I mean?
Well, with all the hours that you've got on these locomotives between 2 layouts, they're bound just like anything else. But I'll go back to a word that you used, and it's you said the word priority, and I think that's important. We like operating on scenic layouts. I certainly know you love operating on scenic layouts versus plywood Pacifics, for lack of a better term.
Yeah.
But really, it's the priority of what's important to you. And if ops are important to you, that quality of power, and it doesn't have to be the most expensive locomotive out there. I know that you run a fleet of Atlas locomotives that were not the most expensive locomotives out there. They're not, what you would say is the top tier anymore, but and you can do it with that. It's just all in the maintenance and preparation.
Right. So what I've done is, in my old layout, I had a combination of Atlas, Proto 2000s. I had some Katos. Actually, my Amtrak passenger train locomotives, P42 and the F40PH, those were Katos. Only 2 Katos I had. All my freight locomotives for the PNW were all Atlas. My GATS lease units were P2Ks, 6 axles. I bought 2 that Walters came out with, and in the PNW. Of course, I spent all the time and the money, the capacitors, CSU decoders, tweaking them. I can never get them things to run right. Never. They just would not. They would not. I couldn't get them that smoothness that I was looking for to start it. You'd have to be up to about speed step 6 or 8 before the thing actually started not chugging back and forth. So, needless to say, those engines didn't move much. They kind of like fixtures in the engine house.
That's how we got to meet in person for the first time, because I had one as well, and you said, bring it over, I'll try to tune it up for you, and you load it in a file. But there it sits up in the top corner of my office here. So.
Mine is sitting at somebody else's in the United States. So when I moved down here and I built this layout, I'm like, something, I have no need for 6 axle units anymore.
Right.
6 axles take a lot of radius to run right. They'll make it around a tight curve, but they don't look good. The trucks are bent in on them, and they just. So I didn't have I couldn't make the big sweeping curves that I had up north. So I sold all the 6 axle stuff off. But believe it or not, I have another 6 axle unit I just put on. I needed one more CSX locomotive, and a buddy of mine that I do a lot of DCC work from up in New Hampshire, I said he sent me a bunch of CSX locomotives that he had. He couldn't get him to stay on the rail at his house. I don't know what was going on, but I ran some of them here, and the same thing was happening. They kept derailing, but I found one that makes it between the CSX yard and Worcester, and as long as it made that trip, I was fine with me. I didn't need to go any farther than that. So I just actually weathered that thing up the other day, and that thing's running pretty good. But it's an Acton blue box, believe it or not.
Wow.
That's what it is. It's an Acton blue box, and it runs. for some reason, when you put an ESU decoder in an Athens locomotive, it just kind of, and you do the motor tune. I think the motor tune is the big thing. So I had to do the motor tune on like 3 times in order to get that thing to. I mean, it starts off smooth, but it's not. But you're still a little choppy in the beginning, but it's nowhere near what those Bachmans were.
Yeah.
So anyway, so yeah, I got rid of all the 3-axle locomotives because I just didn't feel as though I needed them anymore.
Yeah. And and again, at that point of being that, we're not saying you have to go out and buy the most expensive locomotive or whatnot. You can take what you have and make it reliable with some work, with a little bit of investment, but certainly worth it and certainly worth prioritizing because frustrated operators is not what you want. You want somebody that's going to go in, be able to switch without a whole bunch of issues, just like coupler heights, just like all the other things that seemingly are the kind of the checklist for good operations. And I'm sure you could add to that list.
Right. Well, I mean, like I said, if we're gonna go down a list, I mean, the locomotives to me are the priority because without good running locomotives, the trains ain't moving. I don't care how much planning you do and what you do. If the engines don't move the cars, it's no operation. So the engines is definitely the king around here. The other thing is, the next thing is the coupler heights. That's another big thing. So I've been to a lot of different layouts where there's different sizes, shelf couplers against normal couplers, scale couplers against number 5s. I mean, they just try to uncouple them in place is tough. And then some of the small ones, the stick gets stuck in them, and then you pick the stick up and the whole car comes off the rail. So what I did, and I had some cars that had a few mix match. Most of mine all had number 5 KDs. That was my standard in Rhode Island. But when I came up here and I started weathering cars, and then I started taking photos of the cars I was weathering, I'm like, wow, those couples are massive in pictures, And another thing is when I take photo, I'm an amateur photographer at best, but stuff like the camera eye picks up stuff that the normal eye doesn't see,
Right.
And I'm like, wow, it's like the caboose industry hobby tan throws. They work great, but they're gaudy looking in a picture. So anyway, that's a whole nother story. So me and John Farrington got the guy. I said, John, he's got the small little scale head couplers. I said, what size couplers you using? He says, I use the 148 scale heads. I says, okay. I said, we're going to standardize between us because we're going to interchange for real between our 2 railroads. So we want everything to be the same.
Right.
So last year again, during the off season, I bought tons of pairs of 148 couplers, and I said, me and my father was down here, matter of fact, and we sat at the bench, and he took the couplers off, moved them over to me. I put the new couplers on, handed them back to him, and then he had the test track with the 2 KD height adjusters on the end, and he would go back and forth. And I said, I want height. I want them even. I don't want one dropped. I don't want nothing. I want to know because if I get all the little bushings you get to put underneath there, we had them, and we went car by car to make sure. Because when you're running a train in a video and you're videoing it, it's not the worst of seeing couplers offset. You know what I mean? I know nobody can see what I'm doing over here, but it's just, and then if you like your track work, it looks nice to you when you're looking at it, but you get down to the camera view, it doesn't look as smooth as you think it looks. The camera unveils track work, and it's like the prototype. I mean, if you look at a prototype video and you look down, a guy zooms in on track, even the best mainline is like, it's wavy, what I mean? It's like Hales, wow, you don't know there was a grade over there, but when you look at it from far away, you don't notice it, So, but the number 5 couplers are more forgiving because there's a lot more room for them to jump up and down in. But on the 148, you don't have that. You got like half that. So those things are going to be pretty much right on the money.
Yeah, and if you choose to go with a big coupler, or if you decide to go with the scale, at least standardize. At least try to make it all the same. Hey, we get it. If you have standard heads. I moved over to scale heads. Right after you did, I was kind of inspired by it, but it was also because I'm noticing all the cars I'm buying now are all coming with scale heads, so I wanted them all to be the same. And for some of them, you can't change them out. It's like if you put like a regular head on a scale. For example, the Tangent PS 4750s. If you try to put a regular head on it, it actually hits parts, some of the detail parts. I'm like, well, that doesn't work. It's getting a scale head cap on it, and I'm just going to start changing everything out a little at a time. But yeah, it's definitely important. Those little things that, like you go to Syracuse and you see guys, that have put in the work, like Drew James. They've put in the work, making sure their power. I mean, the scenery is awesome, and we love that. I mean, it's just incredible to run your train through all that scenery, but it's highlighted, or it's exponentially better because it's running great through that scenery.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, not coming apart. But I mean, yeah, so couplers are important. The only thing I find there's a drawback to everything. So the number fives, you can get long shank, short shank, you get offset, underset, you can get all them sides. The 148 don't offer that. You get one shank length, you get the standard coupler, and that's it. That could be a problem when you're trying to adjust the height and everything up and down. But using them little shims underneath the trucks, that usually fixes it and everything.
Yeah.
But they look a lot better. They everything pulls good. When I purposely do a video of a train going by to make sure the couplers, even when I'm staging, I always look at the line, and that sometimes I miss one, so I grab them and I put them on the bench and I fix them. I put them back on, because there's nothing worse than pulling a train up a helix and then thing come apart.
Yeah.
We don't want that. So anyway, so couplers are important too. Keep them standardized, all the same size. Don't mix and match them. The new ones, they put scale on there, but they're plastic, and if you put them on long trains that are heavy, the plastic doesn't have the strength that the metal ones have, and they will open right up and rip out on you. I mean, I've had it happen. You can't connect a shelf coupler to a standard coupler. You can do it if you slam them together, but to try to bring a train in slow and try to prototypically couple up to that train, the shelf coupler, they're not going to win. They're just going to fight each other, So you're just going to be there, and then you're putting your stick in there to try to get them lined up right, and it's just standardize them. They're easier.
Yeah, that's for sure. And I'm sure we can come up with more things on that list, and we're going to have an opportunity to do that. If you're listening to this and you can't tell, Don and myself, we've got a passion for operations. It's certainly just an absolute enjoyment to have a railroad that does something. And I know you've asked people that question. You've gone over and seen layouts and asked them, hey, nice railroad, what does it do? And then when they're able to do something, it just it just takes the hobby to a whole new level. And we're going to be focusing on operations a little bit more with the podcast. We've had a whole list of guests that have come on and they've told their model railroading story. And right at the end, they're like, oh, but I didn't get to talk about operations. Well, we're going to give the opportunity to those folks to come on and talk operations. And Don's going to join me with that. He's going to be co-hosting that show. We're going to do that once a month. We'll bring a guest on and we're going to talk operations with them and let them tell us how they develop their operating scheme. And we'll talk all points operations and what they're up to and what they like to improve. And, we'll give pointers along the way and feedback and the whole 9 yards. So we're going to have a lot of fun with that kind of show. And Don, I know you've been looking forward to doing this for a bit. We've been talking about it. So we're going to get that fired up in the next month or so.
Good. I'm glad finally. I've been looking forward to this one. It's a lot. I mean, operations is fun. There's a lot of other things involved besides that. You go down a list. We were talking about, like Ray mentioned, plywood centrals and scenery. To me, scenery is the last thing. Even though I didn't even operate here until my scenery was done. Put it that way. I had guys that I operate with said, "Well, we're going to operate in your layout." I said, "Well, not until the scenery's done." "Well, why can't we operate now?" I said, "Because we're not operating not until the scenery's done." I said, "Because I don't want to do it until the scenery's done. That's simple as that." I said, I can't operate and do scenery at the same time. Scenery is a whole nother animal. It makes a mess. There's a lot of cleaning involved after you do the scenery. It's not like I've been some layouts with guys scenery the day before, the 2 hours before their op session. The train got the way of doing scenery and just stopped dead in his tracks because, oops, I didn't clean the railheads off from all the glue I put all over them. So
capacitors won't do anything for you there.
Exactly. Yeah, sure. I say you need a bank of capacitors for those. But just a few other things. Is that, like, forget the scenery part. If you're going to do operations, you need to set your operations up. You need to do that to prove your track work, to make sure you're not going to have issues with cars derailing, switch points, all that stuff. Because Once you ballast your track, that's not a good time to go back and try to fix the switches derailing your cars. You need to do anything power. Make sure the switches all getting power. Go around with a meter checking your points. Make sure you got a solid connection to all your switch points and everything. Because once you put the ballast down, don't depend on the little hinge at the end to carry the power through the point, because it's eventually that glue is going to get in there and stop all that. So you need to. And then again, that's where the capacitors come in, because these capacitors will handle a 2-inch switch point with no problem, because it does have two trucks on each end of the engine, so they will push over all that stuff. But that's the weakest point of the switch, is the point.
Right.
Even if you got the old Atlas with the rivets, and some of the new switches now, they have a little hinge point. They've got a lot better with that, but it's still a point of contact. Yeah. But wiring, making sure your wiring's right. What I did is I use an engine with no capacitors, just an engine. I didn't have a shell on it. It was just a chassis with a motor. And I run that thing around, and I would make sure. Actually, I ran it around. I disconnected the front truck on one of them, just ran it around with the rear truck like a Tyco. And if that ran through, then I knew my engines were going to run through with no problem.
Yeah, that's a great way to test it.
Right.
Yeah.
And then once you did all that, and you got dependable track work, and you got good power, and a crappiest engine will run through all that thing, now you're ready to move on to consider doing some scenery work, because now you've nipped all that. It's nothing. There's nothing worse than, like I say, you ballast a switch and then all of a sudden the switch don't work, and it's hard to fix it once it's ballasted. Then you get so frustrated, you break it, and now you got to cut it out of the ballast. And it's like, why did I ballast this for? I should have checked all this first. You know what I mean? But in the long term, my layout up in Rhode Island, for instance, we operated that thing 12, 13, 14 years. So track does wear out, switches do wear out, and there's a point where you gotta cut the switch out, just like the real railroad does. Cut the switch out, put a new switch in, reballast it. So it's not like you're ever going to get away from it. But in the beginning, it's always good to have good electrical connections, good track work, no derailments, and then before you even think about doing scenery. So to me, scenery is the back. Even though I want it done before I operate, it's still third or fourth on the list, actually, probably. I'm sure there's something else in there that I didn't mention yet, but it's always something.
Yeah, you definitely don't want to burn yourself out over rework. You want to be able to, be able to have accomplishments and keep the flywheel turning. But if you're not putting in those, the efforts in the beginning to make sure that you have the right wiring, to make sure that everything is working correctly before you move to the next step, the flywheel stops to move. And that's where you get that burnout, or where you get frustrated. And you don't want to get to that point. You want to be able to keep that flywheel turning by just taking nice gradual steps towards finishing your layout. So some great advice, and I can't wait to hear more advice from you, Don. We'll get that show fired up. We're going to get some guests on here and talk ops, and boy, we got a lot of people to talk to. So that's going to be a lot of fun. But until then, I appreciate you stopping by, getting us up to date on the P&W down in Sebastian, Florida, and look forward to your return on Around the Layout.
Thanks for having me. I'm glad to be back. Looking forward to the once a month thing.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Around the Layout. Learn more about today's episode, check out past shows, and much more on our website, aroundthelayout.com. Show your support by becoming an operating crew member at aroundthelayout.com/crew. Follow us on social media, aroundthelayout.com/social. And send us your feedback, aroundthelayout@gmail.com. Thanks for hanging out with us around the layout.